Have you ever heard of someone being saved by a complete stranger, and then that stranger simply disappeared as if he had never existed? No trace, no name, no clue. Just the impact of his presence, like a divine breath that arrives, fulfills a mission, and leaves silently. It may sound like a movie script, but what you are about to hear is real, mysterious, and deeply moving. A story that makes us question everything: coincidence or the intervention of an angel. We live in a busy world where we often fail to notice the subtle signs that surround us. But at certain moments, something inexplicable happens. A presence appears out of nowhere, someone who appears at the exact moment we are about to fall. They say the right words, make the right gesture, and save us. And when we try to thank them or understand what happened, we realize that person is no longer there. We don't know their name, no one has seen them again, there are no records. And what remains is a feeling of deep peace and the certainty that it wasn't normal, it was spiritual, it was supernatural. This is the story of a man on the verge of death, alone, desperate, with no faith in life left, until a beggar appears out of nowhere. Ragged, silent, with a serene look and a welcoming presence, he grabs the man's arm at just the right moment. He doesn't shout, he doesn't judge, he just is there. And that's enough. Minutes later, despair turns into hope. The desire to die gives way to the desire to live. But when the man tries to find the beggar to thank him, he discovers the unthinkable. No one has seen him anymore. No one in that place knows who he is. It's as if he never existed. What you're about to discover may surprise you, because this is not an isolated story. There are hundreds, perhaps thousands, of similar stories around the world, across cultures, religions, and beliefs. Stories of people who were saved by someone who seemed ordinary, but who acted with wisdom, light, and purpose that escape human understanding. Many of these people believe to this day that they met an angel in disguise. Have you ever been there? Have you ever felt like someone appeared out of nowhere, helped you at a crucial moment, and then disappeared like a light wind? Maybe it was someone ordinary, or maybe it was something more. A sign from above, a message, a reminder that we are being watched and cared for even when we don't realize it. Stay with me until the end, because what you are about to hear now may touch deep parts of your soul, and perhaps help you understand events that you yourself experienced but could not explain. Let's dive together into this mysterious, spiritual, and exciting journey. Because the story of the beggar who disappeared after saving a life is just the beginning. And perhaps as you hear all this, something inside you is already stirring. A memory. A moment that seemed ordinary, but now begins to make more sense. It could have been that stranger who helped you when you needed it most, or that unexpected gesture that changed the course of your day, or your life. Has this ever happened to you? Have you ever experienced something like this, where you felt that there was something bigger at work there, beyond logic, beyond the visible? If this topic resonates with you, leave a comment below with what has touched you the most so far. Share your story, your opinion, or even that question you've never had the courage to express. Sometimes what you write can touch other people who are going through difficult times and need to see that they are not alone. And when you comment, you don't just strengthen this conversation, you help build a community of people who believe that there is something more between heaven and earth. And if this message touched you in any way, if it gave you goosebumps or a sense of comfort, take the opportunity to like this video right now. This isn't just a quick gesture, it's a sign that this type of content is valuable to you. And do you know what's even more beautiful? Each like, each comment, each new subscription makes this message go further. It reaches people who may be in the dark today, in need of a light, a sign, a voice that says, hey, you're not alone. So, if you haven't subscribed to this channel yet, subscribe now and turn on notifications. That way you'll continue to receive stories like this one, stories that warm the soul, that make you think, feel, and believe again. Your presence here makes all the difference, because this space is more than a channel. It's a spiritual meeting point, where everyone has something to say, to hear, and to feel. And speaking of feelings, what happened after that encounter with the beggar is something that still resonates in the lives of those who were saved. Because there are details in this story that have not been told, and the next one will surprise you. In the hustle and bustle of everyday life, most of us live as if everything is under the control of logic. We wake up, follow our routine, make choices, and when something unexpected happens, we try to find a rational explanation. But what if some things simply cannot be explained in this way? What if, in the midst of this journey called life, there are encounters that seem random, but carry a much greater purpose? Sometimes what we call coincidence can actually be a carefully orchestrated intervention by forces beyond our comprehension. This is where a concept as old as it is powerful comes in. Earthly angels. You may never have heard this term directly, but you have certainly come across stories, or even personal experiences, that make this name resonate within you. These are those moments when someone appears out of nowhere, does something extraordinary, changes the course of a situation, and then disappears without a trace, literally, as if they had never existed. Various spiritual traditions around the world report this type of phenomenon, from biblical accounts to Eastern beliefs to contemporary experiences documented in books and interviews. There is an invisible thread that connects these testimonies. They speak of celestial beings who, for a specific reason, a mission, a warning, a deliverance, take on human form to intervene in someone's reality. They do not arrive with wings, halos, or bright lights. They arrive like any other ordinary person, an elderly person in line at the grocery store, a lost child on the street, a beggar sitting on the sidewalk. And yet, something about them touches us in an inexplicable way. These angels in human form do not announce who they are. They do not ask for recognition. They appear at the exact moment when everything seems lost, and when help has been given, when a life has been saved, or a decision has been transformed. They simply disappear, and they leave behind a trail of gratitude, doubt, and a deep feeling that something greater happened there. A mystery that does not disappear with time. On the contrary, it only grows. Some say that these angels are direct projections from higher planes, sent to correct the course of things when human free will alone can no longer do the job. Others believe that they are elevated spirits, chosen for specific missions on this material plane. And there are still those who say that all of us, at some point in our lives, can also be used as instruments of this same force, even without knowing it. When you hear stories like that of the homeless man who appeared out of nowhere, saved a life and then disappeared without explanation, it's impossible not to wonder, what if he was never just a homeless man? What if he was there for a purpose? What if his frail, unassuming appearance was actually the perfect way to go unnoticed by the world, but not by the people who needed that intervention? This is where the concept of hidden truth becomes so relevant, because not everything that seems small really is. And not all help comes with lights and heavenly songs. Often the sacred manifests itself in the ordinary, in the silent backstage of reality, in simple decisions, in unexpected gestures, in encounters that change everything. There is a deep spiritual wisdom that invites us to see beyond appearances, to realize that yes, there are invisible missions happening around us all the time. And sometimes we only realize it after everything has passed. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because understanding who these earthly angels are also leads us to reflect on the impact of these interventions on our own inner transformation. After all, it's not just about who came to save us, but about what that experience awakened within us. About the new mentality that appears after life shows that there is something greater guiding our steps, even when everything seems lost. Comment here. I'm on this journey too, if this all makes sense to you. Sometimes life takes us to a limit, a point so dark, so silent, that it seems like there is no one else in the world, no outstretched hand, no voice calling back, only the weight of one's own pain, of unresolved choices, of accumulated guilt, of buried dreams. That was exactly where Raphael found himself, an ordinary man with a story that could be that of any of us. On the outside, he seemed to have everything under control. On the inside, it was chaos. An invisible whirlwind of pressures, failures, and disappointments dragged him along day after day until the moment when he simply couldn't take it anymore. On that rainy night, he walked slowly towards the bridge. Without looking to the sides, without hesitating, the cars passed in the distance, The city lights flickered like indifferent ghosts, and everything around him seemed numb. He climbed the railing, took a deep breath, and felt the cold wind hit his face. There were no more plans, no answers, just absolute emptiness. That's when he felt a hand touch his shoulder. At first, he thought it was a police officer, or maybe someone trying to stop what he had already decided. But when he turned around, he found a simple-looking man, an old man with old clothes, an unkempt beard, and deep, serene eyes, as if they carried another dimension within them. The stranger didn't shout, didn't pull, didn't argue. He just hugged him. A gesture so unlikely at that moment that it completely disarmed Raphael. And that hug, it was different. It had a warmth that was hard to explain. As if for a moment, he had returned home. As if someone finally saw the pain that no one else saw. After the hug, words came, simple but direct. The man spoke to him about the value of life, not with catchphrases or ready-made advice, but as if he knew exactly what Raphael was feeling, as if he was there not by chance, but on a mission. The minutes passed, few but intense, and Raphael, without knowing exactly why, got down from the fence. He fell to his knees. He cried like he had never cried before. When he looked up, the man was no longer there. Thinking he had simply left, Raphael went out onto the bridge looking for him. He walked along both sides, looked under the structure, and waited for hours. Nothing, not a sign. The next day he tried to find some clue. He went to local residents and asked about someone with those characteristics. No one knew anything. He searched the bridge's security cameras, and that's when the story took an even stranger turn. No images had recorded the man's presence. No cameras captured that hug, that conversation, that intervention that saved his life. It was as if the encounter had happened on a parallel frequency, behind the scenes of reality, where time and space work differently, where the sacred manifests itself without asking for permission, and where the impossible happens without needing applause. For Raphael, there was no longer any doubt. That man was not just any stranger. He was not a homeless person. He was not a delusion. He was a messenger, an angel, a being sent at that exact moment to prevent a tragedy, to restore meaning, even, if only by a thread. And here is the most disturbing point of all this. How can we explain this type of event? How can we fit into common logic a story where someone appears out of nowhere, says exactly what needs to be heard, changes the course of another person's life, and then disappears as if they had never existed? The answer may not be found in books nor in theories. It is in impact. It's in what that presence provokes. Because when something like that happens, it's not just the person's life that changes. It's their perception of reality that transforms. It's as if suddenly a hidden truth was revealed, something that has always been there, but only manifests itself when the soul is ready to see it. These stories are not just curious or moving. They point to a much deeper reality, that we are not alone. We never were. Even when all seems lost, there is something or someone watching, waiting, ready to act at the right moment. And sometimes that someone comes to us with an ordinary face, with simple clothes, with an appearance that the world ignores, but with a mission that carries the power of the divine. And no matter how much the mind tries to doubt, the heart recognizes. There is a place inside us that knows when it is faced with something greater, and it is in this space that earthly angels touch. They do not need proof, they do not leave traces, but the mark they leave is impossible to erase. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because the question that remains is not just who are they, these beings, but because they appear precisely at certain moments. What is behind these very specific revelations? What triggers these encounters? And what's more, are there signs that an earthly angel is approaching? Could it be that without realizing it, you have already crossed paths with one of them? Write in the comments. That makes sense to me if this kind of story also touches something inside you. Raphael's story would be shocking enough on its own. An unlikely encounter, an unexpected hug, a life saved at the last second. But what happened next is what really shakes common logic. It's what turns a simple event into something that borders on the inexplicable, because no matter How much he tried to rationalize, seek evidence, find logical answers, everything pointed to the opposite. The man who had saved him had left no trace, literally. No resident in the area knew him. None of the neighboring businesses remembered seeing him wandering around there before. No bridge maintenance worker, no guard, no one could describe someone with those characteristics. And we're not talking about a small town where any unusual figure quickly becomes a topic of conversation. It was a place of constant flux with traffic, cameras, people walking around day and night. But the man seemed to have appeared out of nowhere and returned to nowhere. Raphael, still in shock from everything he had experienced, decided to look deeper. He personally went to the security cameras installed on the posts, at the bridge entrances, at the bus stops around. He reviewed the image history with an acquaintance who worked in urban monitoring, and what he discovered only increased. The mystery. He did appear in the recordings and walking towards the fence. But the man in question, in none of them. That's right. No image captured his presence, the part of their conversation, the hug, that decisive moment. It was as if Raphael was talking to the void. He, alone, facing the abyss, and then kneeling, crying, but no figure nearby, no shadow, no silhouette, nothing. How to explain? How to accept that something so concrete, so transformative, so profoundly real, simply hadn't happened for the eyes of the world? But for Raphael, it happened. And how it happened. The hug was not an illusion. The voice that touched him so deeply was not an invention. And what convinced him most of all was something that no camera would ever be able to capture, the feeling of peace. Because after that encounter, something changed inside him. Not just the decision not to throw himself into the fire, but his perception of his own existence. It was as if the presence of that man had left an invisible but powerful trace, a kind of constant warmth in his chest, a strange calm, deep, as if he had come back from an internal war and was finally breathing safely. Over the next few days, Raphael began to have dreams about the man. In some, he smiled and walked down streets that Raphael had never seen before, but that seemed familiar. In others, he simply looked at him silently, with a look that said everything without needing to say anything. These dreams didn't come as nightmares or confusion. They came as reminders, as if that presence was still nearby, silent but attentive. And then, something curious began to happen. Other people around Raphael began to notice the change. They said he was different, calmer, more present, lighter, and he felt it himself. It was as if a thick cloud had dissipated, as if he were looking at life with different eyes. The most disconcerting thing about all this is that, even without concrete proof, he knew that the encounter had been real. Perhaps more real than anything I had experienced up until then, because, deep down there, are experiences that don't need to be explained, only felt. And this is the kind of truth that escapes technical explanations, that hides behind what we call chance, but which is actually pure purpose. An intervention, a message disguised as coincidence, a visit that goes beyond the limits of logic. And what is most striking about this journey is the contrast, because to those who looked from the outside, this man was just a beggar, someone invisible to the eyes of most, ignored by the crowds, discarded by statistics. But for Raphael, he was the link between despair and hope, a turning point, a channel of transformation. And if you stop to think about it, this carries a powerful revelation. Perhaps not everything is as it seems. Perhaps life's greatest messengers are hidden precisely in the places the world teaches us to avoid. In the faces of those who live on the margins, in the figures of those who carry little appearance but a lot of meaning. And that's where the impact lies. Because the great hidden truth is that often the help we need most does not come packaged in pretty speeches or recognizable forms. It comes disguised, it comes silently, it comes mysteriously. And for that very reason, it comes more powerful. People like this don't follow patterns. They show up at critical moments, do exactly what needs to be done, no more, no less, and disappear without fanfare, as if they had accomplished a task, as if they knew that right then and there a gesture would be enough, a look, a phrase, a hug, nothing more. And then they disappear, as if they had never existed. But the effect they leave is lasting. It's a seed planted in the soul, and there's no way to pull it out. The fact that no witness saw the man that night is yet another detail that defies any simple explanation. There were people passing by on the bridge, drivers in cars, someone on a motorcycle stopped at a traffic light, and yet no one saw that man, only Raphael. And this raises an even deeper question. What if certain encounters are meant only for those who need to experience them? What if, at certain moments, reality discreetly bends to create the exact space for a miracle? No audience, no proof. Only the right person, at the right time with the heart in the right state to receive that intervention. This man's disappearance is not an ending. It is a portal. He is not gone. He fulfilled. And when something fulfills its purpose, it no longer needs to remain visible. That doesn't mean it didn't exist. It means it did exist completely. And so he left only the essential, the transformation. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because there is a pattern behind these apparitions, a kind of silent energy that manifests itself in several reports around the world. Similar cases where strangers appear out of nowhere to save, guide, or calm, and then are never seen again. What do these cases have in common? What does this reveal about our connection to the unseen? And is there any way to know when one of these encounters is about to happen? Comment here. I'm on this journey too. If you've ever felt that something out of the ordinary touched your life, even though no one else understood, what happened? To Raphael, after that mysterious encounter, was not just an immediate relief or an impulsive decision to keep living. It was as if, when touched by that invisible presence, he had crossed an internal portal, a break with everything that had previously seemed immutable, the pain, the loneliness, the emotional exhaustion. It was no longer about surviving one day at a time. It was about live with purpose, with eyes open, with an almost electric sensation that there was something bigger going on behind the scenes of existence. In the early days, it was as if he were relearning how to breathe. Everything seemed clearer. The sky, the wind, the sounds of the city. Things that had previously gone unnoticed, a bird landing on the window, the smell of breakfast, the kindness of a stranger, now touched him differently. As if life, once worn out by repetition, had gained a new shine. But the deepest part was not visible on the outside. It was what was happening inside. Raphael began to ask himself, why did that man appear just at that moment? Why did he save me? What if this was all a calling? This thought consumed him, not as a burden, but as a kind of spark. A spark that ignited something that had long been dormant within him, spiritual curiosity. Until then, Raphael had never been a person of active faith. He had grown up hearing about God, angels, and miracles, but the harshness of life had hardened him as well. Spirituality for him was a distant, almost abstract idea. But after that day, everything changed. He began to seek answers, and more than that, to seek presence. He began to pray, even without knowing exactly how. He read old books. He listened to stories of people who had also been saved inexplicably. And little by little, he began to notice a pattern. These experiences were not coincidences. They were invitations. Invitations to a more conscious, more connected, more awake life. That's when he started seeing the signs, small at first but undeniable. A book that fell off the shelf opened to a page that answered exactly one of his questions. A stranger on the subway who said something seemingly random but had a message he needed to hear. A dream so vivid it seemed more like a memory than a fantasy. All of this was shaping his new mindset. And it wasn't just about moving away from the darkness anymore. It was about actively choosing to walk toward the light. He understood that he no longer needed to run away from the pain or pretend it didn't exist. True transformation came when he looked at it courageously and asked, "What did you come to teach me?" That figure on the bridge, who saved him without a name or explanation, had planted a hidden truth in his heart, that there is something or someone who sees us even when we are invisible to the world. And that changed everything. Raphael, began to talk about it with the people around him. At first he was hesitant, afraid of seeming crazy. But as he shared, he discovered that many people also had similar stories. People who felt a hand hold theirs when no one was around, who heard a soft voice in the darkest moment, who were saved by someone they never saw again. Little by little, he left his negative thoughts behind. Not because they magically disappeared, but because he learned not to feed them anymore, like someone who decides not to water the wrong plant anymore. He began to choose every day to look at what he builds and not what he destroys. And this decision, as simple as it may seem, has enormous power. Because the way you talk to yourself in the silence of your mind shapes everything you experience. Raphael began to see life as a field full of signs, no longer as a sequence of bad luck or cold coincidences. He now believed that each person, each encounter, each experience, no matter how painful, carried a piece of direction. It was no longer about understanding everything, but about trusting, about walking even without seeing the whole map. And that is not passivity. It is courage. The courage to continue even when everything seems uncertain. His spiritual transformation was not a spectacle. It was a silent but profound process. Day by day, he became more present, more light-hearted, more generous. He began to visit hospitals, voluntarily, not to tell his story but simply to listen, to offer the same kind of silent presence that had once saved him. Maybe he would never know who this man was. Maybe he was an angel, maybe an enlightened soul, maybe a manifestation of the divine itself. But what mattered now was what he had become because of it. And that's the most beautiful part of this whole journey. Salvation wasn't the end of the story. It was their start. Because saving someone is not just about pulling them back from the brink. It is about giving them back the ability to see beauty along the way. It is about showing them that there is still music in the simple things, that there is still meaning in breathing, that despite everything, it is still worth being here. Raphael now believed unshakably that nothing happens by chance, that there is a kind of invisible choreography guiding everything, even when it seems like chaos. And that this movement is subtle, but whoever learns to pay attention begins to see with different eyes, begins to feel with different skin. And this new feeling is what transforms a wounded heart into a source of healing. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because this story raises a powerful question. What if what we call salvation is just the beginning of something much greater? A calling to a mission, an awakening to a role we don't yet understand. Because after life gives us back, when all seemed lost, nothing can ever be the same again. Comment here. That makes sense to me if you've ever felt that something, even invisible, pulled you back when everything seemed hopeless. And when you understand that you were saved for a reason, life stops being just a sequence of random events. Everything gains a new layer of meaning. That feeling of being lost gives way to something much more valuable: direction. And that's when a new phase of the journey begins, no longer based on fear or escape, but guided by purpose, intuition, and connection with something greater than ourselves. If everything we've talked about so far has touched something inside you, if it made sense to you, then take a look at the material I left below. It's called Reading Your Birth Angel. It is complementary content to what we talked about here and can save you a lot of time in practice. It was prepared with great care to help those who feel they are going through a phase of transformation but are still looking for clearer guidance, to go through this process with confidence. This material shows you how to connect with the personalized guidance from the angelic kingdom to help you navigate your own internal changes with more clarity and peace. It's here in the description, but I might take it down in the next few days. So if it's useful to you, take advantage of it while it's still available. It could open doors you never imagined. Now, getting back to our story, there is something very important that still needs to be said about what happens when someone awakens spiritually after such a profound experience. It's curious how after such a transformative experience, everything that previously seemed merely symbolic begins to come to life. That passage from the Bible, for example, "Do not neglect to show hospitality to strangers, for by so doing, Some have entertained angels without knowing it. Hebrews 13:2 goes from being just a pretty verse to a pulsating reminder that there is more between heaven and earth than meets the eye. When we look at it this way, we realize that these mysterious encounters with unknown figures, full of compassion and peace, are part of something much deeper, a subtle but powerful intervention that defies logic and embraces the unseen. And this isn't just confined to the ancient pages of Scripture. There are dozens, hundreds of stories from around the world, in completely different cultures, with people who don't even know each other, but who report incredibly similar experiences. A stranger appears at exactly the right moment, says something that changes everything, sometimes just a sentence, and then disappears without a trace. The mind tries to rationalize, of course. It was just a coincidence, or someone was very kind, or even, I must have imagined it. But what remains is that presence, a feeling that cannot be explained, but that leaves a mark, that transforms. A woman from the interior of Chile reported that after an accident on a remote road, she was trapped in her car, alone, in heavy rain. Her cell phone had no signal. As she cried, feeling despair rising, she said a man suddenly appeared, with a calm look and a soothing voice. He helped her open the car door, and in a few words, instructed her what to do to avoid panicking. Later, when the authorities arrived and she tried to show them who had helped her, there was no trace of anyone. No footprints in the mud, nothing. Another well-known case involved a soldier in Afghanistan. He said that during a night patrol, he was separated from his team and, surrounded by tension, began to pray silently, asking for protection. That was when he felt a hand on his shoulder and heard a voice say, "Go this way," without fear. He didn't see who it was, but he followed the direction the hand pointed. Minutes later, he was reunited with his troops, safe. The most disturbing part? The base's thermal sensors didn't detect anyone nearby at that moment. These stories move us because they awaken something that often lies dormant amidst the hustle and bustle of everyday life, the awareness that we are being cared for, even when everything seems silent. It is as if, behind the scenes of visible reality, there is a greater intelligence, loving, attentive, that acts when we need it most. Sometimes it reveals itself in the form of intuition. Other times it comes through someone who seems ordinary, but who arrives with such a profound impact that it changes our entire trajectory. And here comes a hidden truth that few people stop to consider. The invisible is not always inaccessible. Sometimes it just needs openness, sensitivity, and a certain willingness to listen more with the heart than with the ears. The Bible is full of episodes like this, where the angelic presence appears not as a spectacle, but as guidance, as in the case of Tobias in the book of Tobit, led by Raphael on his journey without knowing that he was walking alongside an angel. Or Elijah, who in the midst of despair was fed by an angel in the desert. These are moments of silent intervention, but with immense impact. The most curious thing is that many of these interventions do not require any kind of elaborate ritual. They happen most of the time when someone is broken inside, but still has a thread of faith burning. It is in this gap, between despair and hope, that the extraordinary usually finds space to act. And of course, for those who are willing to look beyond the surface, these experiences leave deep scars. They change the way a person relates to the world, to others, and to themselves. Because after something like this, you can no longer ignore the fact that there is a greater force guiding you. And this changes even the smallest decisions. How you treat the people around you, how you listen to your own intuition, and even how you react to suffering. Because there is a question that begins to echo within us after hearing so many similar stories. What if this happened to me? And more than that, has it already happened and I just didn't notice? There are signs that we only recognize when we change our mindset, when we exchange automatic skepticism for a more open and present attitude. Perhaps what you thought was just a stroke of luck was, in fact, a silent response to something much bigger. Comment here, I'm on this journey too. I want to know who is feeling this calling. Because after all this, a question begins to form deep within our consciousness. One of those that cannot be silenced by ready-made answers. Is what we call coincidence just a comfortable word to explain what we do not understand? Or are we ignoring signs that, if seen from a different perspective, could completely change the direction of our journey? Think about it. How many times have you crossed paths with someone at a specific moment, said or heard something that seemed simple but later had a huge impact? Sometimes it's a single phrase, a look, or even a silent presence that appears when you need it most. And you even think, how lucky. But is it really luck? Or is it a kind of subtle orchestration that doesn't appear on maps, but silently guides each step? Many people experience moments like this and try to rationalize. It's natural. The mind seeks logic. It wants to fit everything into a system. But what if not everything has to fit? What if part of what really matters in this life is between the lines, in the scenes of everyday life, where the common eyes don't see, but the heart feels? There is something curious about all this. The great spiritual masters, visionaries, prophets, and even the most mysterious scientists have always touched on this point. There is more to the universe than meets the eye. There are movements happening behind the scenes of reality. And sometimes these movements manifest themselves with such precision, with such synchronicity, that it is impossible not to stop and think, that was a message. The question is, are you paying attention? Are you willing to step out of autopilot mode and look at the world with more sensitivity, more presence? Because it's only when you change the lens of perception that you begin to notice how everything can be connected. Even that delay that made you cross someone's path, or that unexpected call that came at the exact moment you were about to give up on everything. And here comes an important detail that almost no one talks about. True transformation does not come when you find all the answers. It begins when you start to live the questions more deeply. When you stop seeking absolute control and start to dance with the unknown. This changes your mindset. It changes the way you interpret events. Because suddenly, what seemed like chaos begins to show a hidden order, a kind of silent language of the universe. Perhaps this is why so many cultures speak of angels as messengers, not just celestial entities with wings and light, but as forms of consciousness that manifest themselves in the most diverse ways. Sometimes as people, sometimes as events, sometimes as ideas that come out of nowhere but that bring absurd clarity. They don't arrive with announcements or fireworks. They arrive when you least expect them, but need them the most, and when that happens, something inside you recognizes it. It's not always visible, but it's inevitable. A calm that emerges in the midst of confusion, a certainty in the midst of doubt, a direction that appears at the exact moment you were without a map. This isn't about superstition, it's about perception, about starting to see beyond the surface, about stepping out of the noise of the world and listening to that more subtle frequency, where the answers aren't always spoken, but they are felt. Of course, there will always be those who say that all of this is imagination, that it is coincidence, that it is luck. But then comes that nagging question that nudges you and prevents you from going back to sleep in the same state as before. What if it isn't? What if every detail, every person, every delay or deviation has a greater reason? What if angels really walk among us, saying silent but attentive? Sometimes the greatest sign is precisely in what we would ignore in our daily lives. And realizing this requires a decision, a choice to look more closely, to live more attentively. Because the universe, or God, whatever name you use, doesn't usually shout. It whispers. And those who live too quickly end up missing these whispers that can change everything. So, look at your own life. Try to remember a time when something unlikely protected you, pushed you in a direction that later made perfect sense. An encounter, a strange coincidence, a strong intuition that saved you from something bigger. Was it just chance? Or was it someone or something there with you, even if you didn't realize it at the time? Comment here. That makes sense to me. I want to know who is starting to connect their own dots too, because understanding how to recognize an angelic sign can completely transform the way you see your own life. These moments are not just isolated episodes. They carry an impact that reverberates in our mind, in our heart, and even in our soul, causing a subtle but powerful change in our mindset and in the decisions we make from then on. First, one of the most striking features of an angelic intervention is the presence of an inexplicable peace that invades the environment or your own interior at the moment the sign occurs. It is not an ordinary peace, the kind that comes from being comfortable or relaxed. It is something deeper, almost palpable, that calms internal storms, doubts and fears that seemed so great and insurmountable until that moment. It is as if suddenly you feel a kind of silent and invisible shelter, a tranquility that does not depend on external circumstances. It is a state that often leaves us perplexed because it comes at a difficult moment, precisely when nothing would indicate that we could feel this way. Another aspect that cannot go unnoticed is synchronicity. Those coincidences that go beyond mere chance and begin to seem like coded messages to those who know how to look closely. Perhaps it is an unexpected encounter with a person who will bring you a word or advice that is essential for the moment you are living, or a sequence of events that seem to have their own choreography, aligning facts and people in perfect harmony, even though you cannot explain exactly how it all fits together. These synchronicities are like clues left along the way, a kind of invisible roadmap that guides those who are open to perceiving it. Another telltale sign is the presence of words that touch you deeply, almost as if they were spoken directly to you. It could be a phrase uttered in a casual conversation, a snippet of a song, or even something you read in a book or see on a screen unexpectedly. The thing is, these words seem to activate something inside you, an awakening, a memory, a clarity that wasn't there before. It's as if the message was tailor-made, speaking to your most intimate truth, helping to illuminate a path that until then seemed lost in the dark. And finally, a characteristic that may seem contradictory, but which is very common in reports of experiences with angelic signs, is the sudden disappearance. The presence, the sensation, the encounter, all of this can dissipate as quickly as it arrived, leaving a kind of void full of meaning. It is as if these moments were flashes, quick, windows open to a world that we do not usually see, and which close so that we can continue our journey with another vision, another energy. This sudden disappearance may seem strange, but in fact it reinforces the idea that this is not something ordinary, but rather a fragment of a hidden truth that goes beyond everyday time and space. Noticing these details requires a different perspective, a sensitivity that is often overshadowed by the fast pace of life and by a mind that wants quick and simple explanations. But when you start to notice these signs, transformation soon takes place. Your mindset changes, decisions take on new weight and meaning, and that feeling of being guided, even when the steps are not clear, becomes a silent beacon that illuminates the path ahead. It's interesting to think that, even amidst so much information, noise and distractions, the universe, or the spiritual dimension that each of us believes exists, finds ways to communicate. And this communication is not invasive, it is subtle, respectful, waiting for you to be attentive and open to receive. This changes everything about the way you perceive your own role in the great journey of life. Of course, to recognize an angelic sign, you also need to cultivate a connection with your own inner self, an active listening to what goes beyond the obvious. It is an invitation to stop chasing ready-made answers and start allowing yourself to feel, perceive, and interpret with your heart, because many of these messages are not explicit. They do not come in capital letters. They manifest themselves in the details, in the silent moments, in the small miracles that seem to happen by chance, but are in fact the manifestation of something much greater. And it is in this practice of being attentive, present, and receptive that the spiritual journey takes on new meaning. It is not just about expecting grand miracles or dramatic interventions, but rather about noticing the beauty of the revelations hidden in everyday life, in the small choices, in the opportunities that appear when least expected. It is there, in this space between the visible and the invisible, that angels seem to act, not as distant beings, but as invisible companions who move in the shadows to illuminate our path. This renewed perspective invites us to a profound internal transformation, a change of mindset that impacts everything around us. Because when you start to recognize these signs, your relationship with the world changes. It becomes more sensitive, more receptive, more full of meaning. And this affects your decisions, your attitudes, and even your sense of purpose. It's like discovering that behind the scenes of life, there is a complex and delicate plot where every move has an impact. Every choice can be a step towards something greater. Now think about the depth of this movement. Recognizing an angelic sign is not only an act of perception, but also an invitation to go behind the scenes of one's own existence, to understand that the hidden truth that governs life is far beyond what we can immediately see. And this revelation has enormous power, because it not only connects us to a spiritual dimension, but also strengthens the confidence that, even in the most difficult phases, we are not alone, that there is a purpose, a greater intelligence, at work. Realizing this brings a sense of security and comfort, which in turn drives us to move forward with more courage, more faith, and more clarity. The journey ceases to be just a sequence of random events and becomes an experience rich in learning and meaning. And this is a transformation that impacts the way we relate to ourselves, to others, and to the world. Comment below. I'm on this journey too. I want to know who is already starting to notice these details that make all the difference. Have you ever stopped to think if, at some point in your life, an angel passed by you without you even noticing? This idea may seem a bit distant, almost too magical to believe, but when we start to look back a little more carefully, many stories and experiences take on new meaning. How many times has someone appeared exactly when you were at the limit, at that crossroads where it seemed like all the doors were closing, but someone unexpected brought a word, a gesture, an energy that changed everything? Was this a mere coincidence or a discrete intervention that you were unable to recognize at the time? These questions are not just curiosities to feed the imagination. They touch on the essence of our journey, the mystery that permeates our lives, and the way the invisible manifests itself in everyday life. When we reflect on these moments, it is common to feel a mix of emotions: relief, surprise, gratitude, and even a certain chill, as if something greater were revealing itself behind the scenes of our existence. And do you know what is most fascinating? Often these angels do not present themselves as celestial figures, dressed in light or with resplendent wings, but rather in the form of ordinary people, friends, strangers, even strangers who crossed our path at the right moment, with a word, a hug, or a simple act of kindness that seems to have come from another world. This connection, which goes beyond the obvious, invites us to expand our perception and question what we really call chance. Why is it that, among billions of people, that particular person appeared in our lives at that precise moment? Does the universe work with a secret logic, an intelligence that guides these small, great interventions? And more than that, what happens when we start to recognize these moments as signs? How does this change our mindset, our decisions, our worldview? It's amazing how much of an impact this new perspective can have. Suddenly, we can look at challenges with more confidence, knowing that we are not alone and that there are invisible forces with us. This belief, no matter what your faith or spiritual understanding, brings about a profound transformation in the way we view life, a kind of peace that doesn't depend on circumstances, but on the inner certainty that there is purpose in even the smallest details. And even when life insists on showing its harshest side, this perception that there are angels in disguise accompanies us as a constant reminder that the impossible can become possible. How many times have you felt a strong intuition to take a different path, or received an unexpected word that brought clarity in a moment of confusion? These are the subtle signs that connect us with something greater, that act behind the scenes of reality, influencing our journey in a silent but powerful way. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because recognizing that we have had angels in our lives, even if we didn't know it, opens a door to exploring the hidden truth behind coincidences and seemingly banal encounters. This revelation invites us to be more attentive, more open to perceiving the small interventions that may be happening every day, and that often go unnoticed due to the rush, mental noise, or simply disbelief. It is in this awakening to details that transformation begins to happen. We begin to value the present moment more, to connect with the people around us with more empathy, and to realize that our own attitude can be, for someone, an angelic sign. This creates a powerful cycle of impact and change, where each gesture, each word, and each decision gains a different, richer, and more meaningful dimension. Our mindset expands, allowing us to see beyond what is visible, opening ourselves to possibilities that exist beyond our immediate understanding. And this has a direct effect on the choices we make, the doors we decide to open or close, and the path we take in our lives. The journey ceases to be a lonely one, full of doubts and uncertainties, and becomes a process of constant learning, full of revelations that, even if subtle, have the power to transform. And it's not just a matter of believing, but of experiencing. Because each person has their own way of perceiving and interpreting these signs, and this makes the experience even richer and more personal. What may be an angelic moment for one person may go unnoticed for another, precisely because we are all at different levels of consciousness and connection with what is beyond the material. So the question is, have you ever experienced something like this? Has someone ever appeared in your life at the exact moment when you most needed help, comfort, or guidance? If so, what changed within you as a result of that experience? And if you haven't noticed yet, maybe it's time to start looking more closely, with the curiosity and openness that these moments deserve, because recognizing these signs is not just a spiritual act, but a conscious decision to get in touch with the hidden truth that permeates our existence and that can lead us to genuine transformation. It is an invitation to live with more purpose, more presence, and with the certainty that each step has a greater impact than we imagine. Comment below. This makes sense to me. I really want to know how you have experienced these small, great revelations that give meaning to our journey. When we look back and begin to see these experiences in a new light, something inside us changes. It's as if a veil is lifted, revealing a deeper layer of our reality, one that cannot be explained by chance or common logic alone, but that carries a hidden truth about our existence. This change in perception affects our mindset, the way we interpret events and the decisions we make from then on. It's a subtle but powerful impact that affects the background of our journey, showing us that even in the most difficult moments, there are forces working silently to guide us. This awareness, when it gains ground, invites us to slow down, to pay attention to signs that previously went unnoticed, to synchronicities that seem too small to be relevant, and to words that, for some inexplicable reason, touch our hearts and echo for days. Often what we call coincidence is, in fact, a delicate intervention, an invisible hand that moves the pieces on the board to show us that we are not alone on this journey. It is an invitation to open ourselves to a greater reality where spirituality manifests itself in unexpected and surprising ways. When we open this door, we begin to realize that our journey is much richer and more complex than we imagined. Each encounter, each challenge, each moment of doubt or joy has a purpose that goes beyond the immediate, revealing layers and meanings that only become clear over time. And in this process, our way of acting also changes. The decisions we make begin to carry more awareness, more intentionality, and this directly influences the course of our lives. The impact of this mental and spiritual change can be gigantic, shaping not only how we live, but also who we become. And it's not just a matter of blindly believing, but of being open to the possibilities that exist beyond what meets the eye. This openness is an act of courage, a decision to allow oneself to feel, question, and learn from what is behind the scenes, away from the spotlight of routine. The hidden truth, which often manifests itself through angels or angelic signs, is an essential part of this transformation, as it reminds us that life is a constant revelation, a sequence of moments that, when aligned, lead us to a greater understanding of ourselves and the world around us. Now, I want to go even deeper into this subject, because true change happens when we are able to recognize that these signs are not just isolated episodes, but part of a larger flow that connects us with the essence of our existence. This connection, when cultivated, expands our ability to perceive what is beyond the obvious, to feel the presence of something greater that acts behind the scenes, guiding our decisions and inspiring our journey. It is an invitation to awaken to the hidden magic in everyday life and understand that transformation is always within our reach. We just need to be attentive to it. This renewed mindset challenges us to look at moments of silence, synchronicities, and those words that seem to arrive at just the right time as powerful messages. Each of these manifestations carries an impact, a lesson that can be a turning point in our journey. The journey of recognizing these signs is unique to each person, but what unites us all is the possibility of living a more connected life, with meaning and purpose, where every detail, no matter how small, can contain a revelation capable of changing everything. If this story touched your heart, leave a comment below. Do you believe it was an angel or a coincidence? And if you have ever experienced something similar, write your story. It may touch other lives. If you've made it this far, I want to truly thank you for this exchange we had. It's rare to find moments like these, when we can stop, reflect, and feel this deeper connection with everything that's happening in our lives. If what we talked about made sense to you, if it somehow opened a new window to understanding your experiences, this is the kind of content that's worth following closely. So if you want to continue on this journey, stay with me here. There's a lot of valuable stuff coming that can further transform your way of seeing the world. And since we're at this point, leave a simple sentence in the comments that shows that you've made it to the end, something like "I'm with you until the end" or "This message was for me." It will be good to see who is really walking together in this discovery, because it is in this exchange that we truly grow. Oh, and if this video touched your heart, that sincere like helps to keep this connection alive, shows that we are aligned in this search for meaning and transformation. There is a video here that complements this subject in a surprising way. So click and continue with me there. I really want this conversation to continue because there is much more for us to discover together. See you soon.